So in the latest opinion, former public protector advocate Thuli Madonsela and three others, Justice Malala, Palesa Morudu, who is also an academic, and Professor Barney Pityana, have called for Professor Adam Habib to be reinstated without delay at the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. The former Wits vice-chancellor was suspended 3 weeks ago from his new job as SOAS director after he used the N-word during a video meeting with students. An article on the letter says the four blame being woke for Habib's demise. Professor Barney Pityana is from the Thabo Mbeki Leadership Foundation and joins us now. A very good evening to you, Prof, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So let me just go straight to what has been understood by the motivation letter that you've written. So there appears to be a belief that you're blaming wokeness for the removal, or rather suspension, of Adam Habib. Is this a correct interpretation of your defense?
It is very much so, because clearly the interaction between Adam Habib and the students has not been properly examined. Because if it arises from that interaction, it is quite clear in that interaction that he was not making a racist statement. It was a statement about race. It was not a racist statement on his part, to the extent that he actually did say that whoever uses that word in a manner that suggested race, then that person would face the disciplinary processes of the School of Oriental and African Studies. That was correct. That was not the utterance of a racist at all. So we wrote this letter to make it very clear that Adam Habib, whom we have known, is not a racist. We also wanted to make the point that in the circumstances, in the context in which this utterance was said, there was no indicator of racism on his part. And that's why we raised our voices, and not because we're saying it is correct to use the N-word, but we are saying that the N-word is indicative of something that was not.
Okay, Prof, I want to get to this issue. You say being woke is a problem, and for some, it would be contrary to what they understand the meaning to be, unless you're applying a different interpretation to be aware of even socially, politically context. One can't see that as being wrong in terms of being informed, being up to date. Is that what you mean? Or are you referring to something else in your understanding of being woke being the reason why Professor Adam Habib is here?
The context, Tsepiso, is that the director of the school is having an interaction, a conversation with students. The context is a university. University are places where ideas are put forward, where there is freedom for people to engage each other on ideas. So the context is the university. The second thing we are saying is that by the use of that word woke, the suggestion is that while there is an appropriate level of hypersensitivity about racism, but we are saying that in that particular circumstance, without proper examination, there's a suggestion that this person who used the word was racist, whereas the person who was using the word, if you like, in its normal sense, as would be the case in a sentence.
Okay.
So woke in that case is used in a negative way. It's not always negative.
All right, we'll come to the African race context in just a moment, Prof, but I want to go to another important point that you made. So is there agreement on the conclusion that Professor Adam Habib is guilty of bad judgment based on the actual incident, or is it also taking into account the historical problems at the university?
Professor Habib has made an apology himself. He has made a concession to that extent. I personally hoped that he had never made such a concession. It was not necessary in the circumstances, but he made the concession. Now, listen, this man was in post for 3 weeks in a different country, in a different environment. The culture of that country, and indeed even the politics of that country, he clearly hadn't grasped. That's the reason he apologized. He didn't apologize because he had expressed made a racist expression. He apologized because he may well have misread the culture and the circumstances of an environment that he was not really quite familiar with.
Okay.
Because he'd only been there 3 weeks.
Okay, so I want to talk about something else, because obviously this has resonated with some here at home. So taking into account the principles of Black consciousness, has wokeness blurred the cultural lines locally, as in making it devoid of our historical context? Because a senior academic at the SOAS has said that people who understood the South African race context and anti-apartheid struggle would be all too familiar with the reality that the N-word is not a racist term in the lexicon of this country. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the N-word is a racist term anywhere, everywhere, I think. But Adam Habib is quite right. Blackness is not a racist term in itself. So nigger is in fact Spanish or Portuguese for blackness. So if you use it as a direct translation of blackness, blackness is not racist. So he will be quite right to say, in a world that we live in South Africa, affirmation of blackness in the world is a potent political expression that is designed to actually address the underlying disempowerment and indeed racism about blackness that is taking place. Mm-hmm. So nigger is, if you like, direct translation of black, okay? But actually, in certain circumstances, it does have direct connotation that are racist. In Brazil, for example, nigger is a normal expression. It's not, there's nothing untoward about nigger if you're talking in Brazil. But if you're in London, clearly we now know that nigger is a very explosive expression, which frankly, within the 3 weeks or so that Adam Habib was at the London School of Oriental and African Studies, he may not have actually been properly apprised of the sensitivity of this word, could have used it in its etymological sense. So
let's talk about that and the agenda, because there are those who have said that an academic being a leader from Africa with an ambitious internationalization agenda that centers on the global South is deemed not good enough, because he was once one of several South African vice-chancellors who responded to protests with policing. So is it about an over-policing of some of these racial contexts or the policy agendas that we're talking about?
So Professor Habib was headhunted for that position of director. He wasn't looking for a job. He was headhunted by the School of Oriental and African Studies. He thought about it, he consulted about it, and I'm among the people whom he consulted. His excitement about it is the confluence that position brought about Oriental studies and African studies in the context of London. And he saw it as an opportunity to make an important contribution about Asian and African studies in world affairs. So he was quite conscious about what he was doing in accepting that position. What happened here at Wits, of course, depends on where you stand. I was a member of council at Wits, you might know, at the time of the fees must fall. In fact, Adam Habib was very supportive of the students. He was pushing the students to define the environment in which the scope of the struggle that they were waging. So in many ways, he was sensitive to what the students were saying. He even said that he would be marching with the students to Pretoria in order to make the point. So it's not that he was anti-students. As a vice-chancellor, he was not.
All right, so...
But he's...
Prof, I'm sure you'd agree with me that there would be a difference of opinion between the defined and the definer. But I want to talk about what are we ultimately saying about this saga. Is it as a result of cancel culture that Professor Adam Habib finds himself in? And if he leaves after 6 weeks on the job, is there anyone who will touch this job at the university? And what will that mean?
SOAS is a very prestigious institution. It's a very, very important research institution in the context of the University of London. And that's the reason it wanted to attract somebody like Adam Habib to that institution. It's true that within a very short while he put his foot in it, if you like, but he may not, I don't think he intended to, but he certainly did. But my feeling is, our feeling, is that the university actually took a position in haste, and they should never have asked the director of the school to step aside while there's an investigation happening. They should have understood that this was actually an opportunity for the university to debate the critical issues, how they affect intellectual life, how they affect research and the meanings of words, how they affect a progressive political action in the context of London. It's an international institution. They've got students in London, not just from London, from the Caribbean, from Asia, from Africa, from Europe. It's a major international institution, SOAS is.
Prof, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It is a complex discussion that really does need time, but we really appreciate your patience in trying to unpack it from your perspective. And those of you who agree with you, thank you so much, Professor Barney Pityana. He is from the Thabo Mbeki Leadership Foundation.